Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the world as it existed thousands of years ago. Not the world of textbooks and museum displays, but the real, living, breathing world where civilizations rose and fell, where great cities thrived and disappeared, where human beings built wonders that would eventually be swallowed by time itself. These weren't primitive societies struggling to survive. Many were sophisticated cultures with advanced technologies, complex social structures, and profound understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and engineering that would rival anything we have today. Somewhere beneath the sands of ancient deserts, under the canopy of impenetrable jungles, at the bottom of silent oceans, and buried beneath the very ground we walk on, the remnants of lost civilizations wait. They're not legends or fairy tales. They're real places, built by real people, that have been hidden from human memory for centuries or even millennia. And every year, modern archaeology reveals more of these forgotten worlds, forcing us to rewrite what we thought we knew about human history. What is a lost civilization, really? It's more than just ancient ruins covered by vegetation or structures buried under sand. A lost civilization is a society that achieved a level of complexity, a degree of cultural sophistication, that was then forgotten by the world. Sometimes these civilizations fell to natural disasters, climate change, or warfare. Other times, they were abandoned for reasons we still don't understand. Their people scattered, their stories faded from memory, and their very existence became myth. Then, centuries later, an archaeologist's shovel, a farmer's plow, or advanced satellite technology reveals what was hidden, and we're forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The story of human civilization is far older, far more complex, and far more mysterious than we ever imagined. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, let me take you on a journey through time and across continents. We'll explore cities that were built before the pyramids of Egypt, civilizations that mastered technologies we're only now beginning to understand, and cultures that disappeared so completely that even their names were lost. Some of these places you may have heard of, others will be completely new to you, but each one has a story to tell, a mystery to unravel, and a lesson about the fragility and resilience of human society. These aren't just archaeological curiosities or historical footnotes. These lost civilizations matter because they show us what's possible and what's at risk. They demonstrate that human beings have always been capable of extraordinary achievements, but also that even the mightiest empire, the most advanced society, can vanish if conditions turn against it. In an age when we face our own challenges, from climate change to social upheaval, the stories of these lost worlds have never been more relevant. So settle in, get comfortable, and prepare to travel through the mists of time to places where the very stones whisper secrets of ages past. Göbekli Tepe, the temple that rewrote history. In the rolling hills of southeastern Turkey, near the Syrian border, stands a mound that locals once called Potbelly Hill. For centuries, shepherds grazed their flocks there, never suspecting that beneath their feet lay one of the most revolutionary archaeological discoveries in human history. This place, known today as Göbekli Tepe, would fundamentally challenge everything we thought we knew about the origins of civilization. The story of Göbekli Tepe's discovery is itself remarkable. In 1963, a joint team from Istanbul University and the University of Chicago conducted a survey of the region. They found some broken limestone pieces and evidence of human activity, but they dismissed the site as nothing more than a medieval cemetery. The mound sat undisturbed for another 3 decades, its secrets safely hidden beneath soil and grass. Then, in 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt visited the site. Unlike his predecessors, Schmidt recognized something extraordinary in those scattered limestone fragments. He saw hints of something much older, something that predated any known temple complex in the world. The following year, Schmidt began excavations that would continue until his death in 2014, and what he uncovered would shake the foundations of archaeological theory. Göbekli Tepe consists of massive, T-shaped limestone pillars arranged in circular formations. These aren't small stones. Some of these pillars stand over 18 feet tall and weigh as much as 50 tons. They're intricately carved with reliefs of animals, lions, foxes, scorpions, snakes, wild boars, gazelles, and birds. There are also abstract symbols whose meanings remain mysterious. The craftsmanship is stunning, the detail exquisite, the scale overwhelming. Here's what makes this discovery so extraordinary. When archaeologists dated the site using multiple methods, they found that these structures were built around 9600 BCE. Let that sink in for a moment. Göbekli Tepe is nearly 12,000 years old. It predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. It predates the pyramids of Giza by 7,000 years. It was ancient when ancient Egypt was young. But the real shock came when researchers realized who built it. At the time Göbekli Tepe was constructed, human beings were supposed to be hunter-gatherers. According to every textbook, every established theory, people at this time were nomadic, moving from place to place in small bands, hunting animals and gathering plants. They didn't build permanent structures. They certainly didn't construct elaborate temple complexes requiring hundreds or thousands of workers. Yet here was Göbekli Tepe, standing in defiance of everything we thought we knew. The site required enormous labor. Each pillar had to be quarried from the surrounding limestone bedrock, using only stone tools. Then these massive stones had to be transported, sometimes across considerable distances. They had to be erected, positioned precisely, and carved with intricate designs. This wasn't the work of a few people with spare time. This required organization, planning, a large workforce, and a shared vision that could span years or even decades. Archaeologists found over 100,000 animal bones at the site, primarily from wild gazelles, but also from wild cattle, boar, and other game. There's no evidence that these animals were domesticated. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were indeed hunter-gatherers, but they were hunter-gatherers capable of something we never imagined possible, creating monumental architecture on a scale that rivals anything built by later agricultural societies. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe forced archaeologists to completely rethink the relationship between settlement, agriculture, and civilization. For generations, scholars believed in a simple progression. First, people learned to farm. This created food surpluses. Food surpluses allowed some people to specialize in activities other than food production. This specialization led to the development of complex social structures, which eventually resulted in cities, temples, and civilization. Klaus Schmidt proposed a radical alternative. What if it worked the other way around? What if the desire to build places like Göbekli Tepe, to create sacred spaces for communal gatherings, was actually the driving force that led to agriculture? His reasoning went like this. Building and maintaining a site like this required feeding hundreds of workers. At first, they could hunt and gather locally, but as the project continued year after year, as more people gathered at the site, as the surrounding game was depleted, the need to ensure a reliable food supply would have become increasingly urgent. Schmidt suggested that perhaps it was this need, the need to support their monumental building projects, that pushed people toward domestication of plants and animals. While this theory remains debated among archaeologists, newly discovered evidence of domestic structures and cereal processing at the site lends support to the idea that Göbekli Tepe was more than just a seasonal gathering place. Recent excavations have revealed even more surprising details. The site isn't just one temple. Ground-penetrating radar has identified at least 16 additional megalith rings buried across 22 acres. Only about 5% of the site has been excavated. Beneath the surface, dozens more structures wait to be uncovered. Additionally, archaeologists have now discovered domestic structures at the site, along with evidence of extensive cereal processing, a water supply system, and tools associated with daily life. Göbekli Tepe wasn't just a ritual center visited by nomads. People lived there, at least seasonally, working on the temples and supporting the community. The purpose of Göbekli Tepe remains debated. Was it a temple, as Schmidt believed? A gathering place for scattered bands of hunter-gatherers to come together for seasonal ceremonies? An astronomical observatory? A place of pilgrimage? The truth is, we don't know. The people who built it left no written records. They're separated from us by 12,000 years of history. We can study their architecture, analyze their artifacts, but we can't read their minds or understand their motivations with certainty. What we do know is this. Göbekli Tepe represents a pivotal moment in human history. It shows us that our ancestors were capable of extraordinary achievements long before we gave them credit for. It demonstrates that the drive to create, to build, to make something meaningful and lasting is deeply embedded in human nature. And it reminds us that the story of civilization is far older and far more complex than we ever imagined. One of the most fascinating aspects of the site is how it was abandoned. Around 8200 BCE, the entire complex was deliberately buried. The pillars weren't toppled by enemies or destroyed by natural disaster. They were carefully covered with fill dirt, almost as if the site was being preserved for the future. Why would people invest so much effort in building these structures, only to bury them? Was it a ritual act? Did their religion change? Did the community disperse? We may never know. Today, Göbekli Tepe is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, protected and studied by archaeologists from around the world. A modern shelter has been constructed over the excavated areas to protect them from the elements. Thousands of tourists visit each year, standing among these ancient stones and marveling at what our ancestors achieved. But perhaps the most important legacy of Göbekli Tepe isn't the stones themselves. It's what they teach us about being human. 12,000 years ago, in a world we can barely imagine, people came together with a shared purpose. They moved enormous stones, carved intricate designs, and created something meant to last. They didn't do this for survival. They did it because humans are more than just survival machines. We're meaning makers, storytellers, builders of monuments and dreams. Göbekli Tepe is proof that this essential quality of humanity is as old as civilization itself, perhaps older. As you drift towards sleep tonight, picture those ancient builders working together under the same stars we see today, creating something extraordinary in a world we're only now beginning to understand. They couldn't have imagined that 12,000 years later, we would stand among their stones and wonder at what they accomplished. But perhaps that's part of their message to us across the ages. Build something meaningful. Create something lasting. Because even when civilizations fall and centuries pass, the human drive to make our mark on the world endures. The Indus Valley, cradle of an unnamed civilization. Imagine a civilization as advanced as ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, spread across an area larger than both, with sophisticated cities, advanced engineering, and a writing system all its own. Now imagine that this civilization was completely unknown to the modern world until less than a century ago. This is the story of the Indus Valley Civilization, one of the ancient world's greatest mysteries. The year was 1921. An Indian archaeologist named Dayaram Sani was excavating at a site called Harappa in the Punjab region of British India, now Pakistan. What he found astonished him. Beneath the soil lay the ruins of an ancient city with straight streets laid out in a grid pattern, sophisticated drainage systems, and standardized brick houses. The construction was unlike anything seen in the region before. A year later, in 1922, another archaeologist, R.D. Banerjee, made a similar discovery at a site called Mohenjo-daro, meaning Mound of the Dead, about 400 miles southwest of Harappa. The similarities between the two sites were striking. Clearly, they belonged to the same civilization. As excavations continued over the following decades, the scale of this forgotten culture became apparent. The Indus Valley Civilization, also called the Harappan Civilization after its first discovered city, flourished from approximately 3300 to 1300 BCE. At its height, around 2600 to 1900 BCE, it covered an area of nearly 500,000 square miles, encompassing parts of modern Pakistan, northwestern India, and eastern Afghanistan. Over 1,000 settlements have been identified, ranging from small villages to major urban centers. The civilization was home to an estimated 4 to 6 million people at its peak, making it the most populous early civilization. Let's focus on the two largest cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, because they reveal just how sophisticated this culture was. Both cities were rectangular in plan, divided by a grid of streets running north-south and east-west. This wasn't organic growth, the kind of meandering layout you see in medieval cities. This was deliberate urban planning, executed with precision. The cities were divided into two main areas. An elevated citadel contained public buildings, possibly administrative or religious structures. Below this, a lower town held residential areas, workshops, and marketplaces. The residential architecture is particularly impressive. Houses were built of uniformly sized baked bricks, a technology that provided durability in the monsoon climate. Unlike mud bricks which dissolve in rain, these fired bricks could withstand moisture. Houses ranged from single rooms to large multi-story structures with central courtyards. Many homes had their own wells, providing private water supplies. The more affluent houses featured private bathrooms and toilets made of brick, connected to an elaborate sewage system. And what a sewage system it was. This might be the Indus Valley Civilization's most impressive achievement. Every major street in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa had covered drains running alongside it. These drains were constructed of brick, with regular inspection holes for maintenance. Wastewater from houses flowed into these street drains, which then connected to larger main drains. The system was so well designed that it functioned for centuries. Ancient Rome's sewer system, built more than 2,000 years later, was barely more advanced. In Mohenjo-daro, archaeologists discovered something even more remarkable: a large public bath, known today as the Great Bath, measuring 39 feet by 23 feet and 8 feet deep. Steps led down into the pool from both ends. The floor was made of tightly fitted bricks, sealed with a tar-based waterproofing. Surrounding the bath was a courtyard, with rooms that may have been used for changing or ritual purposes. The sophistication of the construction, including careful attention to water tightness and drainage, suggests this wasn't just a place to get clean. It may have had religious or ceremonial significance. The Indus Valley people were also master craftsmen. They worked with copper, bronze, lead, and tin, creating tools, weapons, and decorative objects. They made exquisite jewelry from gold, silver, and semi-precious stones. One of the most famous artifacts is a tiny bronze statue known as the Dancing Girl, just over 4 inches tall, showing a young woman in a casual pose, one hand on her hip. It's remarkable for its naturalism and the technical skill required to create such a small bronze casting. They also carved intricate seals from steatite, a soft stone. These seals, about an inch square, were carved with animals and a script that remains undeciphered to this day. That script is one of the civilization's greatest mysteries. The Indus script appears on thousands of seals, pottery, and other objects. It consists of about 400 distinct symbols, often arranged in short sequences. Despite decades of effort by linguists and cryptographers, no one has successfully deciphered it. We don't know what language it represents. We don't know if it's a true writing system or some form of symbolic notation. This means we have no historical records from the Indus Valley Civilization, no king lists, no religious texts, no poetry, no administrative documents. Their thoughts, beliefs, and stories remain locked in an undeciphered script. The standardization across the civilization is remarkable. Bricks throughout the entire region were made in a standard ratio, typically 1 to 2 to 4 weights, and measures were uniform. A carved scale discovered at Mohenjo-daro shows decimal subdivisions with incredible precision to within 0.13 millimeters. This level of standardization implies strong central authority, or at least widespread cultural exchange and agreed upon standards. Trade connected the Indus Valley with distant regions. Seals and other Indus artifacts have been found in Mesopotamia, suggesting maritime trade across the Arabian Sea. The Indus people imported materials not found locally. Lapis lazuli, a prized blue stone, came from Afghanistan. Copper came from Rajasthan. They exported cotton textiles, one of their innovations. The Indus Valley was one of the first regions to cultivate cotton and weave it into cloth. But here's perhaps the most intriguing thing about the Indus Valley Civilization. Despite its size and sophistication, despite its cities and trade networks, archaeologists have found remarkably little evidence of armies, warfare, or weapons designed for combat. There are no obvious fortifications around the major cities, no depictions of battles in their art, no royal tombs filled with weapons, as we see in other cultures. This stands in stark contrast to other early civilizations. Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China all show clear evidence of military organization and conflict from early in their development. The relative absence of such evidence at Indus Valley sites suggests the civilization may have been more peaceful during its mature phase, though scholars caution that the lack of evidence doesn't definitively prove the complete absence of conflict. This raises fascinating questions. How did such a large civilization maintain order without visible military force? Was it through religious authority, economic interdependence, strong social cohesion? Or have we simply not found the evidence yet? The absence of monumental architecture, like palaces or temples, is also puzzling. In Egypt, pharaohs built massive pyramids. In Mesopotamia, kings erected ziggurats and palaces. But in the Indus Valley, the buildings are relatively modest and uniform. This suggests either a more egalitarian society or a completely different value system that didn't emphasize monumental displays of power. Around 1900 BCE, the Indus Valley Civilization began to decline. The reasons remain debated among scholars, with multiple theories proposed. Climate change is a leading hypothesis. Studies of ancient sediments suggest that the monsoon patterns shifted, bringing less reliable rainfall. The region became drier. Rivers changed their courses or dried up entirely. Based on these environmental changes, researchers infer that agricultural productivity would have declined, unable to support the large urban populations. There's evidence of flooding at Mohenjo-daro, suggesting that environmental stress may have varied by region. Some researchers have proposed that disease or epidemics might have played a role, though direct evidence is limited. Others suggest that the decline of trade with Mesopotamia, due to political changes there, may have undermined the economic foundations of Indus cities. The truth likely involves a combination of factors. Whatever the cause, the great cities were gradually abandoned. People moved to smaller settlements. The sophisticated urban culture fragmented into localized rural communities. By 1300 BCE, the urban phase of the Indus Valley Civilization had ended, but the people didn't disappear. The descendants of the Indus Valley inhabitants continued to live in the region. Elements of their culture, like certain agricultural practices and perhaps linguistic influences, may have been absorbed into later South Asian cultures. When the Indo-Aryans, speakers of early Sanskrit, arrived in the region sometime after 1500 BCE, they may have interacted with the remnants of the Indus population, blending cultures. Modern excavations continue to reveal new insights. In recent years, archaeologists have discovered several large Indus sites that rival Harappa and Mohenjo-daro in size. Rakhigarhi in Haryana, India, may actually be larger than both of the famous cities. New techniques, including DNA analysis of human remains, are providing clues about the genetic origins and relationships of the Indus people. Ground-penetrating radar and other remote sensing technologies are identifying buried structures without excavation, allowing researchers to map entire ancient cities. The Indus Valley Civilization teaches us that human societies can take many forms. It challenges the assumption that all early civilizations must follow the same pattern of development. A civilization doesn't need pyramids, palaces, or armies to be sophisticated. It doesn't need to glorify individual rulers or construct monumental temples to achieve complexity. The Indus Valley. People created something different, a culture that valued urban planning, sanitation, standardization, and perhaps a more equitable distribution of resources. They were master engineers who understood water management, brickmaking, and urban design at a level that wouldn't be matched for thousands of years. Tonight, as you rest, consider those ancient cities laid out in precise grids, with clean water flowing to every home and waste carried away through sophisticated drains. Think about craftsmen creating intricate jewelry, merchants trading with distant lands, and scribes carefully carving symbols we can no longer read. The Indus Valley. Civilization reminds us that many paths lead to advancement, and that sometimes the most sophisticated solutions are the ones focused not on glorifying kings or gods, but on creating functional, livable cities for ordinary people. In their forgotten streets and carefully planned neighborhoods, we see an ancient vision of urban life that's remarkably modern in its concerns. Atlantis, the legend that refuses to die. There's a story that's haunted human imagination for over 2,000 years. It's been the subject of countless books, movies, and expeditions. People have searched for it in the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, the Caribbean, even Antarctica. Scientists dismiss it as pure fiction, yet the search continues. This is Atlantis, the most famous lost civilization that probably never existed at all. The entire legend of Atlantis comes from a single source, the Greek philosopher Plato. Around 360 BCE, Plato wrote two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, in which he described a powerful island nation that existed 9,000 years before his own time. According to Plato, Atlantis was located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. The island was larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined. It was home to an advanced civilization ruled by kings descended from the sea god Poseidon. Plato described Atlantis in vivid detail. The capital city was built in concentric circles, alternating rings of land and water, connected by tunnels large enough for ships to pass through. At the center stood a magnificent palace and temple dedicated to Poseidon. The temple's exterior was covered in silver, its pinnacles in gold. Inside stood a huge statue of Poseidon in his chariot, pulled by winged horses, surrounded by 100 sea nymphs riding dolphins. The island was blessed with abundant resources. 2 springs, one warm and one cold, provided water. The soil was fertile, supporting diverse agriculture and forests. The mountains contained precious metals, including a mysterious metal called orichalcum, second only to gold in value. The Atlanteans were master engineers. They constructed a great wall around the outer ring of the city, coating it with brass, tin, and orichalcum that gleamed in the sun. They built bridges, dug a canal from the sea to the innermost ring, and created harbors and dockyards filled with ships. The Atlantean Empire extended beyond the island itself, controlling lands in Europe as far as Tyrrhenia, Italy, and in Africa as far as Egypt. They had a powerful military, with large numbers of chariots, infantry, and warships. For generations, the Atlanteans were virtuous, living by divine principles, but gradually, their character declined. Human nature began to dominate their divine inheritance. They became greedy and ambitious, seeking to conquer lands beyond their empire. Then came their downfall. According to Plato, Atlantis launched an invasion of the eastern Mediterranean, attacking Athens and other Greek cities. The Athenians, though outnumbered, fought heroically and defeated the Atlantean forces. Following this defeat, catastrophe struck. In a single day and night of earthquakes and floods, Atlantis was swallowed by the sea, sinking beneath the waves and disappearing forever. This happened, Plato tells us, 9,000 years before his own time, placing the disaster around 960 BCE. That's the story. But here's the question that scholars have debated for 2 millennia. Was Plato describing a real place, or was he creating an allegory? Most historians believe it was the latter. Plato was not primarily a historian. He was a philosopher. His dialogues were vehicles for exploring ideas about politics, ethics, and the nature of human society. In his earlier work, The Republic, Plato had described an ideal society. Atlantis, in this interpretation, represents the opposite, a cautionary tale about what happens when a civilization becomes corrupt. The dialogue itself offers clues. Plato claims the story came from Solon, a famous Athenian lawmaker who visited Egypt 2 centuries before Plato's time. Egyptian priests supposedly told Solon about Atlantis, and the story was passed down through Plato's family. But there's no independent confirmation of this. No Egyptian records mention Atlantis. No other Greek writers before Plato ever referenced it. Even Aristotle, Plato's most famous student, believed his teacher had invented the entire tale for philosophical purposes. Yet the story refuses to die. Why? Perhaps because it speaks to something deep in human psychology. We want to believe that there was once a golden age, a time when civilization reached heights we've since lost. We're fascinated by the idea that beneath the ocean waves, ruins of a great city might still exist, waiting to be discovered. And we're drawn to the warning, implicit in the tale: even the mightiest civilization can fall if it becomes corrupt and overreaches. Throughout history, people have proposed various locations for Atlantis. Some are plausible, at least in the sense that they involve real ancient disasters. The most credible theory connects Atlantis to the Minoan civilization on Crete. Around 1600 BCE, the volcanic island of Thera, modern Santorini, erupted in one of the most powerful volcanic explosions in recorded history. The eruption created massive tsunamis that devastated the Minoan civilization. Cities were destroyed, fleets were wiped out, and the Minoan culture never fully recovered. The parallels to the Atlantis story are striking. The Minoans were an advanced Bronze Age civilization with impressive palaces, sophisticated art, and a powerful navy. Their sudden decline following the Thera eruption could have become the basis for legends about a great civilization destroyed by natural disaster. However, there are problems with this theory. The Minoans lived around 1500 BCE, not 9600 BCE as Plato specified. And Crete didn't sink into the sea. It's still very much above water. Other theories are more speculative. In the 1880s, an American politician and amateur archaeologist named Ignatius Donnelly wrote a book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. He argued that Atlantis was a real continent in the Atlantic Ocean, serving as a cultural bridge between the Old World and the Americas. All ancient civilizations, he claimed, were colonies or cultural descendants of Atlantis. Donnelly's ideas were enormously popular, spawning a whole industry of Atlantis speculation, but they don't hold up to scientific scrutiny. Modern understanding of plate tectonics shows that no large landmass existed in the Atlantic that sank in recent geological history. More recent proposals have placed Atlantis everywhere from Antarctica to the Caribbean to the North Sea. Some theories are based on genuine archaeological mysteries, like the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, an underwater rock formation that some claim is an ancient harbor. Others are pure fantasy, involving ancient aliens or advanced technologies that leave no archaeological trace. Each decade brings new claims, new locations, new evidence that's supposed to finally prove Atlantis was real. But perhaps we're asking the wrong question. Instead of whether Atlantis existed, perhaps we should ask why the story has such enduring power. The tale of Atlantis encapsulates fundamental human concerns. It's about the rise and fall of civilizations, the dangers of hubris and moral corruption, the fragility of even the greatest achievements. It's about how quickly prosperity can turn to disaster, how hubris leads to downfall. In Plato's time, Athens itself provided a cautionary example. The city had reached great heights in the 5th century BCE, leading Greece in the wars against Persia, fostering a golden age of art and philosophy. But Athens overreached, attempting to build an empire and becoming entangled in a disastrous war with Sparta. By Plato's day, Athens's power was broken, its glory faded. Perhaps Plato was reflecting on Athens' own rise and fall when he wrote about Atlantis. The story also resonates with a universal human experience. Every culture has stories about great floods, about civilizations destroyed by angry gods or natural disasters. These myths may preserve distorted memories of real events, catastrophic floods at the end of the last ice age when sea levels rose dramatically, destroying coastal settlements. Around 5600 BCE, rising Mediterranean waters may have breached the Bosphorus Strait, flooding the Black Sea basin and destroying communities around its shores. Such disasters would have been remembered in stories passed down through generations. Modern archaeology has revealed that the ancient world was indeed full of sophisticated civilizations that rose and fell, often catastrophically, the Bronze Age. Collapse around 1200 BCE saw the destruction of major civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean. Cities were burned, trade networks collapsed, and writing systems were forgotten. It took centuries for the region to recover. In more recent times, we've discovered the ruins of Pompeii and Herculaneum, Roman cities buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, preserved for nearly 2,000 years under volcanic ash. These real examples of disaster and rediscovery may help explain Atlantis's enduring appeal. The story reminds us that the past is full of surprises, that great civilizations can be forgotten, that beneath our feet or beneath the waves might lie ruins we never suspected. Even if Plato's Atlantis was purely fictional, the reality it represents, civilizations that rise, flourish, and disappear, is very real. As you drift towards sleep, consider this. The search for Atlantis, whether or not the place ever existed, has led to real discoveries. Explorers looking for Atlantis have found other ancient cities, mapped unknown coastlines, and advanced our understanding of past civilizations. In that sense, even a myth can lead to truth. And perhaps that's Plato's final gift to us. He created a story so compelling, so perfectly crafted, that for over 2,000 years it has inspired people to explore, to question, to imagine what might lie hidden in the depths of time. Whether Atlantis was real or not matters less than what it represents in human imagination. The eternal hope that somewhere, somehow, a perfect civilization once existed, and the eternal warning that even perfection can be lost if we're not careful how we use it. Angkor, when the jungle reclaims an empire, deep in the forests of Cambodia, where humidity hangs thick in the air and vines drape from ancient trees, stone faces stare out from temple walls with serene smiles. Towers carved with intricate scenes rise above the jungle canopy. Massive tree roots embrace stone walls, their gnarled shapes seeming to pull ancient architecture back into the earth. This is Angkor, capital of the Khmer Empire, once the largest pre-industrial city in the world, home to perhaps 1 million people at its height. For centuries, it stood as one of the greatest urban centers ever built. Then it was largely abandoned, swallowed by the jungle, and forgotten by much of the world. The story of Angkor begins in the 9th century CE. The Khmer Empire had existed for some time, but in 802, King Jayavarman II declared himself a universal monarch, establishing his capital in the Angkor region. This began what historians call the Angkorian period, which would last for over 600 years and see the construction of some of the most impressive architectural achievements in human history. The location was chosen carefully. The Angkor Plain in northwestern Cambodia sits in a naturally fertile area with access to abundant water from the Tonle Sap Lake and seasonal monsoons. But here's what made Angkor truly exceptional. The Khmer engineers didn't just accept the natural water availability. They designed and built one of the most sophisticated water management systems ever created before the modern era. The monsoon climate of Cambodia presents a challenge. Between May and November, heavy rains pour down. About 90% of the year's rainfall, rivers flood, and fields turn to muddy lakes. Then comes the dry season, when temperatures soar above 40 degrees Celsius and water becomes scarce agriculture. The foundation of any pre-industrial civilization depends on managing this extreme cycle. The Khmer solution was brilliant. They constructed a vast network of reservoirs called barays, massive artificial lakes that could store water from the monsoon season for use during the dry months. The largest, the West Baray, measured 8 kilometers long and 2 kilometers wide, holding more than 50 million cubic meters of water. These weren't just storage facilities. They were integrated into a complex hydraulic system, including canals, moats, and smaller reservoirs that distributed water across hundreds of square kilometers. The water system served multiple purposes. It irrigated rice fields, allowing multiple harvests per year and supporting a large population. It provided drinking water during the dry season. It helped control flooding during the monsoon. And it had symbolic and religious significance. Water was central to Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. Many of the barays were designed to represent sacred oceans or rivers, with temples positioned as representations of Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain at the center of the universe in Hindu and Buddhist tradition. This engineering enabled Angkor to grow from a small settlement into a sprawling metropolis. At its peak, between the 10th and 13th centuries, Angkor covered an area of over 1,000 square kilometers, making it the largest urban area in the pre-industrial world. Recent LiDAR surveys, which use laser pulses from aircraft to map the ground beneath forest cover, have revealed that Angkor's urban sprawl was even more extensive than previously thought, with residential areas, roads, and water features extending for miles beyond the famous temples. And what temples they were. The most famous is Angkor Wat, built in the early 12th century by King Suryavarman II. It's the largest religious monument in the world, covering an area of 162 hectares, originally dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu. It was later converted to a Buddhist temple, a function it maintains today. The temple is a masterpiece of Khmer architecture. Its 5 towers, representing the 5 peaks of Mount Meru, rise above 3 concentric galleries decorated with nearly 2,000 square meters of bas-relief carvings, depicting scenes from Hindu epics. The precision of Angkor Wat's construction is remarkable. The temple is aligned with impressive astronomical accuracy. On the spring equinox, the sun rises directly over the central tower when viewed from the western entrance. The architectural proportions follow precise mathematical ratios. The measurements encode symbolic meanings related to Hindu cosmology. This wasn't just a building, it was a physical manifestation of religious and philosophical concepts, a map of the cosmos rendered in sandstone. After Suryavarman II died around 1150 CE, the empire fell into turmoil. The Cham people from what is now Vietnam invaded in 1177, sacking the capital and killing the king. But the Khmer rallied under a new king, Jayavarman VII, who drove out the invaders and embarked on the greatest building program in Khmer history. Jayavarman VII was a Buddhist, and his faith shaped his building projects. He constructed Angkor Thom, a new walled city at the heart of the empire. At its center rose the Bayon, a temple mountain featuring 54 towers, each carved with 4 massive faces looking out in the cardinal directions. Scholars debate whose face is depicted, perhaps the Bodhisattva, Avalokiteshvara, or perhaps Jayavarman VII himself. The king also built hospitals, rest houses along roads, and numerous temples throughout the empire. His building program was extraordinary in scale, arguably surpassing even the great Egyptian pharaohs in the amount of stone moved and carved. But this frenzied construction may have contributed to the empire's eventual decline. The building projects required enormous resources, vast amounts of labor, and intensive use of the surrounding forest for timber to fuel the lime kilns needed to produce mortar. The environmental impact may have been severe, contributing to deforestation and soil erosion. The intensive agriculture needed to support the large population may have degraded the farmland over time. By the mid-13th century, cracks were appearing in the empire. The water management system required constant maintenance. If the canals silted up, if the reservoirs weren't properly maintained, the entire system could fail. Recent studies suggest that the 13th and 14th centuries brought unusual climate variability, with both severe droughts and catastrophic floods. These extremes could have overwhelmed the water management system, leading to agricultural failure. There were also external pressures. The Thai kingdom of Ayutthaya, rising to the west, began encroaching on Khmer territory. In 1431, Ayutthayan forces sacked Angkor. While this probably wasn't the sole cause of the city's abandonment, it seems to have been the final blow. The Khmer court moved to a new capital at Phnom Penh, near the Tonle Sap Lake Angkor. The great city that had been the heart of the Ala Empire for 6 centuries was gradually abandoned. But here's an important point that often gets lost in popular accounts. Angkor was never completely abandoned and was never truly lost to the Khmer people. Angkor Wat itself continued to function as a Buddhist monastery, maintained by monks throughout the centuries. Local people always knew about the temples. They told stories about them, made pilgrimages there, and incorporated them into their religious practices. When we talk about Angkor being lost or forgotten, we're really talking about it being unknown to Europeans and the wider world. In the mid-19th century, French explorers began visiting Angkor. The French naturalist Henri Mouhot is often credited with discovering Angkor in 1860, though this is somewhat misleading. Portuguese traders had visited centuries earlier, and European missionaries had written about the temples. But Mouhot's published journals, released after his death, captured European imagination with their vivid descriptions of massive stone temples engulfed by jungle. He compared Angkor Wat to Solomon's temple and said it was grander than anything left by Greece or Rome. This began a period of European exploration and study of Angkor. French colonial authorities, who controlled Cambodia as part of French Indochina, initiated archaeological surveys and restoration projects. They faced challenges. The tropical climate accelerates decay. Tree roots invade stone structures, simultaneously damaging them while sometimes holding them together. Clearing vegetation can cause buildings to collapse. Maintaining the site requires constant work. In the late 20th century, Angkor faced new threats. Cambodia's civil war and the brutal Khmer Rouge regime of 1975 to 1979 caused immense suffering. The Angkor region remained dangerous due to landmines and armed groups for years afterward. Archaeological work largely ceased. The temples were neglected. Some were damaged. Priceless artifacts were looted and sold on the black market. Since the 1990s, as Cambodia stabilized, there's been renewed international effort to preserve and study Angkor. It was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1992. International teams work alongside Cambodian archaeologists to restore temples, stabilize structures, and understand the ancient city better. Modern technology, especially LiDAR, has revolutionized Angkorian archaeology, revealing a vast urban landscape previously hidden beneath forest cover. Today, Angkor is Cambodia's most important tourist attraction, drawing millions of visitors annually. Tourism generates billions of dollars for the Cambodian economy, but this creates challenges. Heavy tourist traffic can damage fragile stone carvings. The water table is being strained by hotels and other development. Balancing preservation with economic needs is an ongoing struggle. The story of Angkor teaches us several lessons. First, even the mightiest cities are vulnerable to environmental and climate change. The Khmer created an engineering marvel that supported a vast population, but when climate patterns shifted, when droughts and floods exceeded the system's capacity to adapt, the whole civilization faltered. This is a stark reminder for our own time, when climate change threatens cities and civilizations around the world. Second, Angkor shows us that abandoned doesn't mean forgotten. Western accounts often portrayed Angkor as a lost city, rediscovered by European explorers. This perspective erases the continuous connection that local people maintained with the site. The temples were never truly lost. They were simply unknown to the West. This is an important distinction, one that recognizes the ongoing cultural connections between modern Cambodians and their ancient heritage. Finally, Angkor reminds us of the interplay between human ambition and environmental limits. The Khmer kings built astounding monuments, created sophisticated water systems, and sustained a massive population in a challenging environment. But the very success of their civilization may have contained the seeds of its decline. The constant building, the pressure on resources, the intensive agriculture, all these may have been unsustainable in the long term. It's a pattern we see repeatedly in history, and one we do well to remember as we face our own resource challenges. Tonight, as sleep approaches, imagine walking through Angkor in its prime. Picture wide avenues bustling with people, markets filled with goods from across Southeast Asia, and massive temples gleaming in the tropical sun. Hear the splash of water in the great berets, the chanting of priests in the temples, the everyday sounds of a great city. Then imagine that same city centuries later, its stones embraced by tree roots, its courtyards silent except for bird calls, its magnificence yielding to the jungle's patient reclamation. Both visions are real. Both are Angkor. And between them lies the entire arc of a civilization's rise and fall, a story written in stone and overgrown with green memory. The Amazon's hidden cities, rewriting New World history. For centuries, the Amazon rainforest was viewed as a pristine wilderness, virtually untouched by human hands. Scholars believed that the jungle's harsh environment, with its poor soils and disease-laden climate, could never support large populations or complex societies. The image was of scattered tribal groups, living simple lives, leaving little lasting mark on the land. It turns out we were spectacularly wrong. The Amazon wasn't a wilderness, it was a garden. And hidden beneath its canopy are the ruins of cities and settlements that once housed millions of people. The story of the Amazon's hidden past is being rewritten thanks to technology. Traditional archaeology in the Amazon is incredibly difficult. The thick jungle canopy makes it almost impossible to see the ground from the air. Dense vegetation quickly reclaims any clearing. The tropical climate accelerates decay, destroying organic materials in years rather than centuries. For decades, archaeologists had hints that the Amazon once supported larger populations, scattered pottery, strange earthworks, but the full extent remained hidden. Then came LiDAR, light detection, and ranging. This technology uses laser pulses fired from aircraft to map the ground surface. The lasers can penetrate gaps in the forest canopy, bouncing back from the ground and creating incredibly detailed three-dimensional maps of the terrain. And when archaeologists began flying LiDAR surveys over the Amazon in the early 21st century, they discovered something astonishing. Beneath the jungle, invisible from ground level and barely detectable from traditional aerial photography, lay thousands of geometric earthworks, perfectly straight roads stretching for kilometers, circular and rectangular formations, networks of ditches and mounds, evidence of urban planning on a scale no one suspected. In Bolivia's Llanos de Mojos region, LiDAR revealed geometric earthworks covering thousands of square kilometers. In Brazil, near the city of Santarém, researchers found evidence of large settlements connected by roads. And in Ecuador, a recent study unveiled a network of cities in the Upano Valley dating back over 2,000 years, with populations that researchers estimate may have reached 100,000 people at their peak. Let's focus on that Ecuadorian discovery, because it illustrates just how wrong our assumptions were. The site, in the Upano Valley in eastern Ecuador, consists of at least 15 settlements connected by an extensive road network. Some of the roads are up to 10 meters wide and extend for 10 to 20 kilometers, running in straight lines over hills and through valleys. This required significant labor and planning. The settlements include residential complexes, ceremonial centers, and agricultural fields. The earthworks create platforms for buildings, terraces for farming, and what appear to be drainage systems. The dating is remarkable. These settlements flourished from around 500 BCE to between 300 and 600 CE. That means they're contemporary with ancient Rome, yet they existed in a part of the world we believed couldn't support complex societies. The population estimates are equally striking. Researchers believe the Upano Valley sites house tens of thousands of people, possibly over 100,000 across the region. This wasn't a small village, it was an urban civilization. But the Upano Valley is just one example. Across the Amazon basin, LiDAR and other remote sensing techniques are revealing evidence of pre-Columbian societies far more sophisticated than anyone imagined. The full extent is still being mapped, but based on the density of settlements discovered so far, researchers have developed population models suggesting that millions of people lived in the Amazon before European contact. Some scholars, extrapolating from settlement patterns and agricultural capacity, believe the population may have been as high as 8 to 10 million in the decades before Columbus arrived, though these estimates remain debated within the archaeological community. How did these societies thrive in an environment we thought couldn't support them? Part of the answer lies in a remarkable substance called terra preta. Black earth, natural Amazon soils are generally poor in nutrients. The heavy rains leach away minerals, and the rapid decomposition of organic matter means fertility isn't replenished. Yet across the Amazon, archaeologists have found patches of incredibly fertile soil, dark, rich, full of nutrients. These aren't natural, they're human-made. Terra preta is created by mixing charcoal, bone, pottery shards, and organic waste into the soil. The charcoal, produced through a process called pyrolysis, creates a stable form of carbon that persists in the soil for thousands of years. It increases the soil's ability to hold nutrients and water. Terra preta soils can remain fertile for millennia, supporting continuous agriculture without fertilizer inputs. Modern farmers in the Amazon seek out terra preta patches because crops grow so much better there. The creation of terra preta wasn't a one-time event. It required sustained effort over generations. People had to produce the charcoal, collect organic waste, and work it into the soil. The distribution of terra preta across the Amazon suggests that many communities were engaged in this practice, deliberately engineering their environment to make it more productive. This is the opposite of slash-and-burn agriculture, which depletes the soil. Terra preta actually enriches it, creating a lasting legacy. The ancient Amazonians also modified the landscape in other ways. In Bolivia, researchers have identified ancient fish weirs, zigzag structures built in rivers to trap fish during annual migrations. There are raised field systems, elevated platforms for growing crops that protect them from seasonal flooding while improving drainage and fertility. Some of these raised field systems cover hundreds of square kilometers. There are causeways connecting settlements across seasonally flooded areas. There are massive geometric earthworks whose purpose remains debated, possibly ceremonial centers, possibly astronomical observatories, possibly both. What happened to these Amazon civilizations? The short, tragic answer is European contact. When Europeans arrived in the Americas in the late 15th century, they brought with them diseases to which Native Americans had no immunity. Smallpox, measles, influenza, and other illnesses spread through indigenous populations with devastating effect. Mortality rates were catastrophic, often exceeding 90% in affected communities. Entire societies collapsed. Knowledge was lost. Survivors scattered into smaller groups that could sustain themselves with less labor-intensive methods. The Spanish and Portuguese explorers, who penetrated the Amazon in the 16th century, found few people and no cities. They encountered isolated tribes living in small villages. This led to the assumption that the Amazon had always been sparsely populated. We now know this wasn't true. What the Europeans saw was the aftermath of demographic catastrophe. They arrived after the apocalypse had already swept through, destroying complex societies and leaving only remnants. The implications of this realization are profound. First, it means that the Amazon rainforest we see today isn't pristine wilderness that's existed unchanged for millions of years. It's a second-growth forest, regrowing in areas where humans once cleared land for cities and farms. The botanical composition of the Amazon has been influenced by millennia of human intervention. Useful tree species are more common near ancient settlement sites because people planted and encouraged them. The Amazon is, to a significant extent, a cultural landscape shaped by human hands. Second, it challenges narratives about indigenous peoples and environmental management. The image of noble savages living in perfect harmony with nature, taking only what they need and leaving no trace, is romanticized nonsense. Real indigenous societies modified their environments extensively, but they did so sustainably, in ways that enriched rather than depleted the ecosystem. The creation of terra preta, the management of useful plant species, the construction of fish weirs and raised fields, all of these enhanced biodiversity and productivity. This offers valuable lessons for modern environmental management. Third, it demonstrates that civilizational complexity can take many forms. Amazonian societies built their cities from wood and earth rather than stone. They lacked metal tools and writing systems as far as we know. But they were sophisticated. capable of urban planning, large-scale engineering, and sustainable management of a challenging environment. They deserve to be recognized alongside other great pre-Columbian civilizations, like the Inca, Maya, and Aztec. The rediscovery of Amazonian civilizations is ongoing. Every year brings new findings. Archaeologists are now exploring areas previously considered too remote or too difficult to access. Indigenous communities are sharing oral histories that provide clues to ancient sites. New technologies, from advanced satellite imagery to ground-penetrating radar, are revealing more of what lies hidden beneath the green canopy. One of the most exciting aspects is that we're at the beginning of this story. Estimates suggest that archaeologists have surveyed less than 1% of the Amazon basin. Thousands of sites likely remain undiscovered. Each one has the potential to expand our understanding of pre-Columbian America. We may find evidence of civilizations that rivaled anything in the Old World, societies whose achievements have been hidden for 5 centuries under a blanket of green. As you settle into sleep tonight, picture the Amazon not as virgin wilderness, but as an ancient cultural landscape. Imagine cities connected by straight roads cutting through the jungle. See farmers tending raised fields, fishermen checking weirs, potters creating decorated ceramics, and children playing in plazas between earthen mounds. Hear the sounds of a living civilization, thousands of voices, the bustle of trade, the rhythms of daily life. Then imagine it all fading, not through conquest or climate change, but through invisible killers, diseases that swept through, leaving settlements empty and knowledge lost. The jungle reclaimed what humans had built, erasing the physical traces while the memories lived on in oral traditions, gradually fading over generations. Now, 500 years later, we're beginning to recover what was lost, to see through the forest and glimpse the vanished cities. The Amazon is revealing its secrets, and with each revelation, we understand more clearly that human history is deeper, richer, and more complex than we ever imagined. Caral-Supe, the America's first civilization. In the arid valleys north of Lima, Peru, about 25 kilometers inland from the Pacific coast, lies a site that's rewriting the prehistory of the Americas. Caral, part of the larger Caral-Supe civilization, is the oldest known urban center in the Americas, predating the Inca by over 4,000 years, contemporary with the earliest pyramids of Egypt and the great cities of Mesopotamia. Yet until the late 20th century, it was virtually unknown outside of Peru, its significance unrecognized even by most archaeologists. The story of Carol's rediscovery centers on a remarkable Peruvian archaeologist named Ruth Shady Solis. In the early 1990s, Shady was investigating archaeological sites in the Supe Valley. She'd heard local stories about ancient ruins in the area, but most scholars dismissed them as relatively recent, perhaps 1,000 years old at most. The structures were unimpressive, low mounds of earth and rubble, nothing like the dramatic Inca stonework at sites like Machu Picchu. But Shady saw something others had missed. The layout of the site suggested complex urban planning. The size of the structures, when properly measured, indicated a settlement of considerable scale. She began excavating in 1994, and what she found astonished everyone. Caral wasn't 1,000 years old. It was 5,000 years old. Radiocarbon dating of plant fibers, specifically from reed bags used to carry the stones for construction, dated to between 3000 and 1800 BCE. This meant Caral flourished during the late, archaic period of Andean prehistory, when most cultures in the Americas were still hunter-gatherers or practicing very simple agriculture. Yet here was a city with monumental architecture, organized labor, and clear evidence of social stratification. Caral covers about 66 hectares and includes 6 large pyramidal structures, numerous smaller mounds, residential areas, and extensive plazas. The largest pyramid is nearly 30 meters tall its base measuring 160 meters by 150 meters. These aren't natural hills. They're deliberately constructed platforms built by moving thousands of cubic meters of stone and earth. The effort required indicates a large workforce organized by some central authority. What makes Caral particularly remarkable is what's missing from the archaeological records so far. Researchers have found no evidence of warfare. No fortifications protect the city. No weapons have been found in excavations. No artistic depictions show conflict or warriors. This stands in notable contrast to other early civilizations. The Mesopotamians built city walls and made bronze weapons. The Egyptians recorded military campaigns. Early Chinese cultures fortified their settlements. The apparent absence of such features at Caral raises intriguing questions about whether civilization necessarily requires organized conflict, though archaeologists caution that absence of evidence isn't definitive proof of absence. Also absent are signs of ceramics. Pottery is usually one of the hallmarks of settled agricultural life, used for storing food and cooking. Yet the Caral civilization apparently didn't make pottery. They used gourds for containers and wove sophisticated textiles from cotton, but fired clay vessels don't appear. This is puzzling because pottery technology was known in other parts of South America at this time. The Caral people simply didn't adopt it, suggesting they had different priorities or that their needs were met by other technologies. What Caral does show is evidence of sophisticated social organization and cultural life. Archaeologists have found numerous quipus, knotted strings that would later be used by the Inca for record keeping. While the Caral quipus can't be read, their presence suggests some form of numerical recording or communication. They've discovered that the city had an elaborate system of underground ceremonial chambers, circular sunken plazas where rituals may have been performed. Music seems to have been important to Caral culture. Excavations have uncovered 32 flutes made from pelican and condor bones, carefully carved and capable of producing different notes. These aren't simple whistles. They're genuine musical instruments. There are also cornets made from deer and llama bones. The presence of so many instruments suggests that music played a significant role in ceremonies and social life. The architecture shows astronomical knowledge. Some structures align with solar and stellar positions, suggesting the Caral people tracked celestial cycles. One circular plaza has been interpreted as a ceremonial calendar, its design encoding important dates in the agricultural year. This makes sense for a society dependent on farming. Tracking seasons is essential for successful cultivation. What did the Caral people eat, and how did they sustain such a large population? The Supe Valley wasn't particularly fertile. Rainfall is sparse, and the natural vegetation is scrubland. But the valley is crossed by the Supe River, fed by runoff from the Andes. The Caral people constructed irrigation channels, diverting river water to fields where they grew squash, beans, and especially cotton. Here's where Caral gets really interesting. Cotton isn't food, yet the Caral people devoted significant agricultural effort to growing it. Why? The answer appears to lie in trade with coastal communities. The Pacific coast of Peru is one of the richest fishing grounds in the world, thanks to the cold Humboldt Current that brings up nutrients from the deep ocean. Ancient coastal peoples harvested vast quantities of fish and shellfish, but they needed something in return for their seafood. They needed cotton for making fishing nets. Evidence supports this theory. Excavations at Caral have found enormous quantities of anchovy and shellfish remains, far too much to have been gathered locally. Meanwhile, coastal sites from the same period show the presence of cotton and inland products. There appears to have been a symbiotic relationship. Inland people at Caral and other Supe Valley sites grew cotton and traded it to coastal fishermen, who provided seafood in return. This trade supplied the protein needed to support Caral's population. The city wasn't alone. Across the Supe Valley, archaeologists have now identified at least 18 sites from the same period with similar architecture and material culture. This was a civilization, not just a single city. The population of the entire Caral-Supe culture may have reached 20,000 or more, distributed across multiple urban centers. Around 1800 BCE, Caral was abandoned. The reasons remain unclear. Climate change may have played a role. Droughts could have reduced the river flow essential for irrigation. Earthquakes are common in the region and could have damaged the structures. Social or political changes might have caused the population to disperse. Whatever the cause, the Great Pyramids were left empty, gradually filling with wind-blown sand. For over 3,000 years, Caral lay forgotten. Local farmers knew about the mounds, but paid them little attention. They seemed like natural hills. Some stones were taken for building material. Looters occasionally dug into the structures, looking for gold or artifacts to sell. The site slowly deteriorated, its significance unrecognized. Ruth Shady's work changed everything. Her excavations and tireless advocacy brought Caral to world attention. In 2009, UNESCO designated Caral a World Heritage Site. The Peruvian government has invested in conservation and tourism infrastructure. Today, visitors can walk among the ancient pyramids, stand in the circular plazas, and marvel at this window into America's deepest past. Caral's significance extends beyond its age. It demonstrates that complex society in the Americas developed independently, without influence from Old World civilizations. There was no diffusion of ideas from Mesopotamia or Egypt. The people of the Andes created their own path to civilization, developing urban planning, monumental architecture, and social complexity through their own innovations. The peaceful nature of Caral culture, as it appears in the archaeological record, challenges assumptions about human nature and social development. The absence of fortifications, weapons, and warfare imagery suggests that at least during the period we can observe, this civilization may have organized itself through cooperation rather than coercion. People can clearly organize themselves into complex hierarchies for cooperative purposes like building monuments or managing irrigation without necessarily requiring standing armies or fortifications. Whether this peaceful character lasted throughout Caral's entire history or represents just the phase we see in the archaeological record remains an open question, but the evidence we have is nonetheless remarkable. Finally, Caral shows us that what counts as civilization can take different forms. The Caral people didn't have writing as far as we know, though Quipus may have served some record-keeping function. They didn't make pottery. They didn't smelt metal. Yet they built cities, planned architecture on a monumental scale, engaged in long-distance trade, and created cultural expressions like music and textile arts that show sophisticated aesthetic sensibilities. They were undeniably civilized, just in ways that don't match the old world template of what civilization looks like. As you close your eyes tonight, journey back 5,000 years to the Supe Valley. Picture Caral in its prime, pyramids rising from the valley floor, their terraced sides gleaming in the Andean sun. See people climbing the wide staircases to plazas at top, where ceremonies unfold to the sound of bone flutes. Watch traders arriving from the coast, carrying bundles of fish to exchange for cotton and valley produce. Hear the murmur of a living city, children playing, craftspeople working, priests conducting rituals. This was civilization's first flowering in the Americas, a culture that thrived for over 1,000 years before fading into the sands. Now, after being forgotten for millennia, Caral speaks to us again, reminding us that the human story in the Americas begins much earlier than we thought, and took forms we're only now beginning to understand and appreciate. Dwarka, where myth meets the seafloor. Off the coast of Gujarat, in western India, about 30 meters beneath the waves, lies one of archaeology's most controversial sites. Divers swim through murky waters past stone structures, walls and pillars covered in marine growth. To some researchers, these are the remains of Dwarka, a legendary city mentioned in ancient Indian texts. To skeptics, they're natural rock formations or medieval ruins of no particular significance. The truth, as often happens in archaeology, probably lies somewhere between mythology and mystery. The story of Dwarka comes from the Mahabharata, one of ancient India's great epics. According to legend, Dwarka was the magnificent capital city of Lord Krishna, a central figure in Hindu mythology. The texts describe it as a planned city with wide streets, beautiful gardens, and elaborate palaces. It was protected by the sea and built on land reclaimed from the ocean. But when Krishna left the earth, the sea reclaimed Dwarka, swallowing the city beneath the waves. For centuries, this was treated as pure mythology, a poetic tale with no basis in historical fact. But in the late 20th century, marine archaeologists began finding intriguing evidence off the Gujarat coast. In 1983, the Archaeological Survey of India launched an expedition led by S.R. Rao. Using side-scan sonar and underwater photography, they identified geometric structures on the seabed near the modern town of Dwarka. Subsequent dives revealed stone walls, what appeared to be dressed stones, cut in regular shapes, and linear features that could be remnants of streets or fortifications. Pottery shards recovered from the area were dated to various periods, some potentially very ancient. Enthusiasts claimed this was the discovery of Krishna's lost city, proof that the mythology preserved memories of a real place. The scientific community responded with caution, and for good reason. Dating underwater structures is notoriously difficult. Determining whether stone formations are natural or artificial when they're covered in centuries of marine growth and sediment is challenging. The structures at Dwarka could be from many different periods. Some might be natural reefs or rock formations. Others could be medieval or later constructions that ended up underwater due to rising sea levels or coastal subsidence. A more systematic investigation occurred in 2001. A joint Indo-Cuban expedition used modern acoustic mapping technology to survey the area. They identified what looked like an ancient port city, with structures spread across several square kilometers. Carbon dating of wood pieces recovered from the site yielded dates around 7500 BCE, suggesting very ancient human activity in the area. Here's where it gets complicated. The structures visible today show a mixture of features from different periods. Some stone artifacts and pottery clearly date to historical periods, perhaps 1 to 2,000 years ago. But there are also indications of much older human presence. Ancient shorelines would have been further out during the Ice Age when sea levels were lower. Coastal settlements from that period would now be underwater. Could Dwarka have been a real city that was inundated as sea levels rose at the end of the last Ice Age? It's possible. Sea levels rose dramatically between 15,000 and 6,000 years ago, sometimes quite rapidly. Coastal communities would have been forced to retreat or would have seen their settlements flood. Stories of such catastrophes could have been preserved in oral tradition for thousands of years, eventually being incorporated into religious texts. The problem is separating genuine archaeological features from natural formations and later constructions. Much of what's been found underwater near Dwarka could have mundane explanations. Basalt formations can fracture in ways that look artificially regular. Scattered dressed stones could have come from medieval structures or ballast from ships. Without careful stratigraphic excavation, which is incredibly difficult underwater, it's hard to build a definitive case. Nevertheless, the investigation of underwater Dwarka has revealed some genuinely interesting findings. There's clear evidence of ancient settlements in the area, on land, and probably extending onto what was then coastal areas, now submerged. The region was important in ancient maritime trade. Stone anchors and pottery from various periods show this was a significant port. The Dwarka case illustrates a broader phenomenon, the way mythology and history intertwine. Ancient texts often preserve garbled memories of real events or places, wrapped in layers of religious significance and embellished over centuries of retelling. The city of Troy was long considered purely mythological until Heinrich Schliemann excavated it in the 1870s. Underwater archaeology has found numerous ancient ports and cities around the world, from the eastern Mediterranean to the coast of India, that were inundated by rising seas or coastal subsidence. What we can say with confidence is that the coastal Gujarat region had significant human presence in ancient times. Some settlements from various periods are now underwater due to changes in sea level. Whether any of these can be definitively identified with the Dwarka of legend remains uncertain. The mythology might preserve a memory of an actual city that was indeed swallowed by the sea, or it might be a story invented to explain underwater ruins discovered by ancient peoples, or it might be pure fiction with no connection to any real place. The controversy around Dwarka also reflects broader tensions in archaeology between enthusiasm for dramatic discoveries and careful scientific methodology. Claims about finding legendary cities generate headlines and tourist interest, but often outpace what the evidence actually supports. This doesn't mean the research isn't valuable. Investigating the underwater structures off Gujarat contributes to our understanding of ancient Indian Ocean trade, coastal settlement patterns, and how ancient peoples adapted to environmental changes. What Dwarka teaches us is to approach ancient texts with an open but critical mind. Mythology isn't history, but it's not pure fiction either. It's something in between, a cultural memory that preserves elements of the past in distorted and embellished form. When archaeologists find evidence that seems to match mythological accounts, it's exciting, but it's essential to follow the evidence wherever it leads, rather than trying to force it to match a predetermined story. The search for submerged cities continues worldwide. Rising sea levels at the end of the Ice Age inundated vast areas of coastal land. Settlements that flourished 10,000 years ago could now be 30 or 40 meters underwater, far offshore from present coastlines. As underwater survey technology improves, we'll likely discover more ancient sites beneath the waves. Some might match locations mentioned in mythology. Others will be completely unknown, adding new chapters to the human story. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, imagine ancient Dwarka not as we find it today, scattered ruins on a murky sea floor, but as it might have been in its prime picture, a thriving port city with ships from distant lands, bringing spices, textiles, and precious goods. See stone buildings rising near the harbor, streets busy with merchants and craftspeople. Hear the calls of vendors, the creak of ships at anchor, the everyday sounds of a maritime center. Then imagine the sea rising, slowly at first, then faster, forcing people to retreat inland as their city is claimed by the waves. Whether this was the Dwarka of legend or simply another of many coastal cities lost to time, the image is powerful, a reminder that the boundary between land and sea has never been fixed, and that much of human history lies hidden beneath the waves, waiting for brave divers and patient archaeologists to bring it back to light. Tartessos, the vanished kingdom of Iberia. In the southwestern corner of the Iberian Peninsula, in what is now southern Spain and Portugal, there once flourished a civilization so wealthy and powerful that ancient Greek writers spoke of it with awe. They called it Tartessos, describing it as a kingdom of fabulous riches, trading in silver, tin, and other precious metals. Then, around 2,500 years ago, Tartessos vanished from history so completely that scholars debated whether it had ever existed at all. Recent archaeological discoveries are finally revealing the reality behind the legend. The earliest references to Tartessos come from ancient Greek texts. The historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, mentioned a Greek sailor named Calais, who was blown off course around 630 BCE and ended up at Tartessos. The Tartessians welcomed him, and he returned to Greece with a cargo so valuable it made him wealthy. Herodotus described Tartessos as lying beyond the Pillars of Heracles, the Strait of Gibraltar, in what Greeks considered the edge of the known world. Other Greek sources praised Tartessian civilization. They spoke of wise kings, advanced metalworking, and a written language. The Greek geographer Strabo wrote of a Tartessian king named Arganthonios, who supposedly ruled for 80 years and lived to be 120. Whether this is historical fact or legend, embellished in the telling, it indicates that Greeks viewed Tartessos as ancient, wealthy, and culturally significant. Then the references stop. After the 6th century BCE, Tartessos disappears from Greek and Phoenician records. No one knows exactly what happened. The silence is so complete that modern scholars wondered if Tartessos was even a real place. Maybe it was a Greek invention, a mythical land of riches like El Dorado. Some even suggested connections to Plato's Atlantis, proposing that Tartessos was the historical basis for that legendary tale. Archaeological evidence began emerging in the late 20th century. Excavations in southwestern Spain found remains of a sophisticated Bronze Age and early Iron Age culture. At sites like Huelva and Cadiz, researchers discovered urban settlements, metalworking facilities, and artifacts indicating extensive trade with the Eastern Mediterranean. The people here were mining copper, tin, silver, and gold from the rich mineral deposits of the region. They were smelting these metals and trading them across the Mediterranean world. One of the most significant discoveries came in 2023 at a site called Casas del Turuñuelo, near the town of Guareña in Badajoz province. Spain. Archaeologists uncovered a Tartessian temple or palace complex dating to the 5th century BCE. What made this site extraordinary were 5 stone reliefs depicting human faces, the first 3-dimensional representations of Tartessian people ever found. 2 of the reliefs show women, possibly goddesses, with elaborate headdresses. A third depicts what appears to be a warrior wearing a helmet. The craftsmanship is sophisticated, showing clear artistic tradition. These sculptures were found in a sealed pit mixed with sacrificial animal bones, suggesting they were carefully buried as part of a ritual. What's particularly intriguing is what happened to this site. Like many Tartessian settlements, Casas del Turuñuelo was deliberately destroyed, not by invaders, but apparently by its own inhabitants. The buildings were systematically dismantled or burned, artifacts were carefully buried, and the entire complex was abandoned. This pattern repeats across multiple Tartessian sites from roughly the same period, around the 5th century BCE. Why would people destroy their own cities? The leading theory is that Tartessos faced some catastrophic challenge, possibly a combination of factors. The 6th and 5th centuries BCE saw major political changes in the Western Mediterranean. The Phoenician city of Tyre, Tartessos' main trading partner, fell to the Babylonians in 573 BCE. The Phoenician colony of Carthage was expanding its power, possibly competing with or subjugating Tartessian trade. Some researchers believe Carthage may have destroyed Tartessian independence, either through conquest or economic domination. Environmental factors may have played a role too. Some geological evidence suggests that earthquakes and tsunamis struck the region during this period. The Guadalquivir River Valley, heartland of Tartessian culture, experienced significant flooding. If major cities were damaged or destroyed by natural disasters, that combined with political and economic pressures could have caused social collapse. The ritualized destruction of sites suggests a religious or cultural component to Tartessos' end. Perhaps they believed their gods had abandoned them, that the natural disasters were divine punishment and that destroying their sacred sites was necessary. Or maybe retreating inhabitants burned their cities to prevent enemies from using them. We simply don't know. What we do know is that by 400 BCE, Tartessian culture had effectively disappeared, absorbed into other Iberian cultures and the expanding Carthaginian sphere of influence. The Tartessian language remains largely undeciphered. We have about 100 inscriptions, using a script similar to Iberian and Phoenician alphabets. Some words can be tentatively read, but full translation eludes scholars. Without being able to read their texts, we're missing crucial information about Tartessian religion, governance, and daily life. What we can piece together from archaeology paints a picture of a sophisticated culture. Tartessos controlled rich metal deposits. They developed advanced mining and smelting techniques. Their metalwork, including elaborate bronze and silver objects, shows high artistic skill. They traded extensively with Phoenicians, Greeks, and other Mediterranean peoples. They built monumental architecture, including large stone buildings. Their agricultural base combined Mediterranean crops, like grapes and olives, with livestock herding. They had urban centers, but also rural settlements. Social organization apparently included a monarchy or aristocracy, as evidenced by rich burials and references to kings in Greek sources. They had religious practices involving animal sacrifice and possibly a pantheon of deities, though details remain obscure. Tartessos has captured modern imagination partly because of its mystery, but also because of suggestions linking it to Atlantis. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato placed Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the same location Greeks associated with Tartessos. Both supposedly had great mineral wealth. Both disappeared suddenly. Some scholars in the early 20th century proposed that Plato based his Atlantis story on garbled reports of Tartessos. This theory is speculative. Plato was writing in the 4th century BCE, after Tartessos had already vanished. He may have heard legends about a rich civilization in the far west that no longer existed, or the similarities might be coincidental. Most scholars think Plato invented Atlantis as an allegory, not a historical place, though he might have incorporated elements from various sources. Whether or not there's a connection to Atlantis, Tartessos was real, a significant Bronze Age and Iron Age civilization that controlled important trade routes and natural resources. Its disappearance shows how even successful cultures can falter when faced with multiple simultaneous challenges. Economic disruption, natural disasters, political pressure, and social stress can combine to topple societies that seem stable. The rediscovery of Tartessos is ongoing. Each excavation reveals more about this fascinating culture. The recent finds at Casas del Turuñuelo, including those remarkable stone faces, give us our first real look at how Tartessians depicted themselves. Future discoveries will hopefully include more texts that can be deciphered, artistic works, and architectural remains. As modern Spain and Portugal recognize the importance of their Tartessian heritage, sites are being protected and studied more systematically. Tourism focused on Tartessian history is developing. Museums display artifacts, bringing this lost civilization to public attention. Tonight, imagine Tartessos in its prime. Picture port cities on the Atlantic coast, where Phoenician ships arrive to trade. See miners extracting silver from mountain veins, smelters pouring molten metal into molds. Hear the ring of hammers on bronze, the bustle of marketplaces. Then imagine the confusion and fear as disaster strikes, whether natural catastrophe, economic collapse, or foreign conquest. See priests conducting desperate sacrifices, trying to appease angry gods. Watch as people carefully bury their sacred objects and burn their temples before fleeing. The ending of Tartessos was deliberate, not slow decline but rapid transformation or destruction. What remained was eventually forgotten, buried under layers of time until modern archaeologists began uncovering fragments of this vanished kingdom, slowly bringing it back from obscurity into the light of historical awareness. The continuous journey of discovery. We've traveled through time tonight, visiting lost civilizations across the globe, from the ancient temple complexes of Göbekli Tepe to the sophisticated urban planning of the Indus Valley, from the legendary Atlantis to the jungle-swallowed ruins of Angkor, from hidden Amazonian cities to Peru's ancient Caral, from submerged Dwarka to vanished Tartessos. Each of these civilizations has taught us something profound about humanity's past and perhaps about our future. What ties all these stories together? What lessons can we draw from these lost civilizations? First and foremost, they remind us that human history is far longer and far more complex than we once believed. Every decade brings new discoveries that push back the dates of major human achievements. We now know that our ancestors built monumental architecture 12,000 years ago, created urban civilizations 5,000 years ago, and developed sophisticated agricultural systems that could support millions of people in environments we thought inhospitable. The story of human civilization keeps getting deeper, richer, and more surprising. These lost civilizations also demonstrate that there are many paths to complexity. The old model of civilization, with its emphasis on writing, metal tools, monumental stone architecture, and military conquest, doesn't capture the full diversity of human achievement. The people of Caral built great cities without pottery or weapons. The Amazonians created sophisticated water management and soil enrichment systems without the wheel. The Indus Valley maintained urban centers without the kind of monumental palaces and temples seen elsewhere. Each culture found its own way, adapted to its own environment, expressed its own values through its material culture. At the same time, we see common themes. Water management appears repeatedly, from Angkor's elaborate system of barrages and canals, to the Indus Valley's covered drains, to the Amazon's raised fields. This makes sense. Agriculture requires water, and agriculture supports settled populations. Controlling water, storing it, distributing it, protecting against floods. These challenges had to be solved by every early civilization. The solutions varied, but the importance of water didn't. Astronomy is another common thread. From the precise alignments at Göbekli Tepe and Caral to Angkor Wat's equinox orientations, ancient peoples paid careful attention to the movements of sun, moon, and stars. This wasn't just religious or symbolic. Tracking seasons was essential for agriculture. Knowing when to plant, when to harvest, when rains would come or rivers would flood, could mean the difference between feast and famine. But perhaps the most sobering lesson from these lost civilizations is their fragility. Every one of them fell. Some disappeared suddenly, victims of natural disasters or military conquest. Others declined gradually, undermined by environmental change, economic disruption, or social stress. None of them lasted. The great cities were abandoned, the complex societies fragmented, and in many cases, even the memory of their existence faded. This isn't ancient history, it's a warning. We live at a time when our own civilization faces significant challenges. Climate change threatens coastal cities and agricultural systems. Resource depletion, environmental degradation, and political instability combine in ways that could undermine the foundations of modern society. The lost civilizations teach us that no matter how advanced, how powerful, how seemingly permanent a society is, it can fall if it doesn't adapt to changing conditions. Yet there's hope in these stories too. Some civilizations, like the Khmer, maintained continuity even when their great cities were abandoned. The people survived, their culture adapted, and modern Cambodians still maintain connections to Angkor. The descendants of the Indus Valley people are part of modern South Asian populations. Knowledge from lost civilizations wasn't entirely lost. Some of it was preserved in oral traditions, incorporated into later cultures, or simply rediscovered when circumstances changed. And now, we're recovering much of what was lost. Modern archaeology, equipped with technologies like LiDAR, ground-penetrating radar, DNA analysis, and advanced dating methods, is revealing secrets that were hidden for millennia. Every year brings new discoveries. Sites that were unknown 5 years ago are now being excavated. Civilizations that were dismissed as myth are proving to be real. The human story keeps expanding, becoming richer and more nuanced. This matters because understanding our past helps us navigate our future. Studying how past societies adapted to climate change, how they managed resources, how they responded to crises, provides valuable lessons. Not everything will translate directly, of course. We face challenges ancient peoples never imagined. But the fundamental dynamics of human societies, the interplay between environment and culture, between innovation and tradition, between ambition and sustainability, these are timeless. The lost civilizations also remind us that cultural heritage is precious and fragile. Sites like Angkor and Caral require active preservation efforts. They're threatened by tourism, development, climate change, and simple neglect. Once destroyed, they can't be recovered. The knowledge they hold, the insights they offer into past human experience, would be lost forever. This is why UNESCO protects World Heritage Sites, why archaeologists work to document and preserve ancient remains, why it's important to support these efforts. There's also the question of how we tell these stories. For too long, the narrative of lost civilizations was framed entirely from a Western perspective, with European explorers discovering sites that local people had always known about. This erases the continuous connection between ancient sites and modern indigenous communities. Angkor was never truly lost. Cambodian people always knew it was there. The Amazonian peoples maintained oral traditions about their ancestors who built great cities. When we talk about rediscovering lost civilizations, we should acknowledge that often we're simply becoming aware of what local communities have remembered all along. Modern archaeology increasingly involves collaboration with descendant communities, respecting their knowledge and giving them a voice in how their heritage is studied and presented. This is as it should be. The past belongs to everyone, but it belongs especially to those whose ancestors created it. Looking forward, what civilizations might be lost today that future archaeologists will rediscover? Climate change will likely render some current coastal cities uninhabitable. Rising seas could submerge portions of Miami, New York, Shanghai, countless others. Future archaeologists, if there are any, might survey these underwater ruins and marvel at the artifacts, trying to understand our culture from what remains, or perhaps our civilization will adapt, find ways to mitigate climate change, manage resources sustainably, and endure. The choice is ours. The lost civilizations we've explored tonight exist in a kind of twilight zone between myth and history. They're real, but much about them remains mysterious. We can walk among their ruins, hold artifacts made by their craftspeople, and marvel at their achievements. But we can't fully know their thoughts, their dreams, their struggles, or their triumphs. We can only piece together fragments, creating partial pictures that hint at the richness of lived experience in these ancient places. This incompleteness is part of what makes lost civilizations so compelling. There's always more to discover, always another layer to uncover. Each new excavation might overturn previous theories or confirm long-held suspicions. The process of recovery is ongoing, painstaking, and endlessly fascinating. As you surrender to sleep, let your mind wander through the ruins we visited. Stand in the circular plaza at Göbekli Tepe, feeling the weight of 12,000 years walk the gridded streets of Mohenjo-daro, admiring its sophisticated urban planning. Imagine diving beneath the waves to explore submerged Dwarka Watch, the sunrise over Angkor Wat's towers, trek through Amazon rainforest, standing before earthworks that once supported vast populations, feel the ocean breeze at Caral, where civilization first flowered in the Americas. Each of these places tells a story about human potential, about what we can achieve when we work together toward common goals. But remember, too, the silence that eventually fell over these places, the abandonment, the forgetting, the slow reclamation by nature. Remember that all human works are temporary, that even the mightiest civilization is subject to forces beyond its control. This isn't a cause for despair, but for perspective. What we build today may not last forever, but it matters. Our choices shape the world for future generations. The lessons we learn from past failures and successes inform how we address present challenges. The lost civilizations aren't really lost. They exist in the archaeological record, waiting to be interpreted. They exist in the DNA of descendant populations. They exist in cultural memories, however transformed by time. And they exist in our growing understanding of human history, each new discovery adding another piece to an infinite puzzle. Tonight, you'll sleep in comfort, surrounded by the amenities of modern civilization. Tomorrow, you'll wake to news from across the globe, transmitted instantly through technologies ancient peoples couldn't have imagined. But the fundamental human drives that built Göbekli Tepe, that planned the cities of the Indus Valley, that carved the temples at Angkor, those same drives still animate us. We're still building, still creating, still trying to make our mark on the world. We're still telling stories, recording our history, hoping that something of what we create will endure. The lost civilizations teach us humility. They remind us that nothing is permanent, but they also teach us pride. Look at what humans have accomplished. From hunter-gatherers barely surviving in a harsh world, we built cities, created art, developed philosophy and mathematics, spread across every continent, and adapted to every environment. We haven't always done it wisely or sustainably, but we've done it. And we're still here, still building, still striving. So rest now. Dream of ancient cities emerging from jungle shadows and desert sands. Dream of divers exploring underwater ruins and archaeologists carefully brushing dirt from precious artifacts. Dream of LiDAR scans revealing hidden structures and carbon dating, pushing back the boundaries of human history. Dream of all the lost civilizations we haven't found yet, all the stories still buried, waiting for their turn to be told. The past is vast, and we've only begun to understand it. But with each discovery, with each revelation, we come a little closer to understanding who we are, where we came from, and where we might be going. Before I leave you to your dreams, I want to ask you something. If you've enjoyed this journey through the lost civilizations of our past, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. There are so many more stories to explore, so many more mysteries to unravel, so many more forgotten corners of human history waiting to be brought back to light. By subscribing, you'll be joining a community of people who are passionate about history, archaeology, and the endless, fascinating story of humanity. And if there's a particular lost civilization you'd like to hear about, drop a comment and let me know. Your suggestions help shape what we explore together. But for now, let the stories settle into your mind. Let the images of ancient stones and forgotten cities accompany you into sleep. Rest well, knowing that while civilizations rise and fall, while empires come and go, the human story continues. We are the inheritors of thousands of years of achievement and failure, triumph and tragedy. We're the latest chapter in a story that began around campfires in the deep past and continues in every corner of the globe today. Sleep well. The past watches over us, patient and eternal. Good night.